Hello, this is Dan Shea with Veterans for Peace Forum, and I want to welcome our audience back. I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. One is Veterans for Peace is going to be doing a benefit here coming in up in July. Let me get this up here. July 25th at the Peace House. The Peace House is located at 2116 Northeast 18th Avenue in Portland, Oregon. We're going to have a sort of a summertime garden party auction. This is a benefit for our local chapter here, so we can continue doing events around Portland and to raise issues that are dealing with the veterans that are coming back, bringing in speakers to talk about their writings that may be dealing with what war means, what's war and peace all about. We're going to have one of our great historians, musical historians basically, who will teach you world revolution through the music of David Rovix, the troubadour who travels across the world. I think he's up in Canada right now and should be coming back, and he's going to be bringing along with him a special guest from across the pond, from London. And we don't know that person, so you're going to have to show up just to find out who that is. We're also going to have Lloyd Marbett, who is well known in Oregon for his work against nuclear plants in Oregon, Washington. Been speaking on uranium, and people have been affected by that along the Columbia Gorge. It'd be a great opportunity to hear him. We're going to have a silent auction. There's going to be food and drink, and the times are going to be, I think, 2 to 5 p.m. Saturday, July 25th at the Peace House. Again, you can just go to VFP chapter 72.org, and you'll see a notification there to keep up on that. Another thing, last month we had Chuck Wiley, who was a GI resistor and had fled to Canada and was seeking asylum there as a conscientious objector, basically, against the war. And we were just getting in the very beginning, talking about his history, and so we didn't get a chance to talk about what was happening in Canada, and we want to come back here for part 2. I also have Steve Gardiner, who's a Army veteran. He's a professor in Abu Dhabi in Anthropology. He's also my cousin, and we go back a long ways, as you can imagine. And we have 2 incredible people here to talk about veterans issues. And before I get to that, I wanted to just mention a couple of things. I want to do a shout out to Angie Reed, Steve's wife, who happens to support him in his research, his work. She's an artist, and without our spouses and the women beside us to keep us going, sometimes it's a difficult job to talk about these things. I would say Jamie also is there for you, and sorry, I forget Jamie's last name again.
Holcomb.
Pardon?
Holcomb.
Colton?
Holcomb.
Holcomb. Yes, that's right. Jamie Holcomb, who is also an artist and a veteran activist, and then to my wife, who today is out with my daughter. It's her birthday, and you never know that birthdays really affect her at all. She's having a great time. We were out last night enjoying ourselves at Jimmy Mac's. Listening to blues by the Sonny Hess, her band, and her guests that were there, Lisa Mann, and other names I can't remember, Vicky something or other. And but it was an incredible night. We're just having a great time. So, but then today, I'm sitting there preparing for this show, and one thing with post-traumatic stress, one thing with veterans is that we can be triggered by anything, and I was watching a show actually, which was pretty interesting. It was Turner Classic. Spencer Tracy was playing a Chief Justice Dan Hayward, and Burt Lancaster is Dr. Ernest Janney in a movie by Stanley Kramer Oscar-winning account of the trial of Nazi war criminals called The Judgment at Nuremberg. An incredibly powerful film, of Janning eventually basically confessing that he knew what was going on and didn't do anything about it. He knew, while others were denying and making all kinds of excuses. In his course, his lawyer was somebody who was, if you're going to say, if he's admitting this, I can't defend him this way, but we're going to look at the world. It's not that he knew, so did everybody know, and so did the U.S., so did England, so did all these people. How do you explain then that they supported Hitler at this? How did they support this? And when I think about Vietnam, I think of the same kinds of things. We knew a lot of people were speaking out, especially with the Gulf War and what's going on in Afghanistan. So it's not just the one individual. We're all sort of responsible for this, and how do we talk about that? Well, veterans, come to see things in a different way. There was another film that I just watched after that too, which was called, I'd never seen this before, I had recorded it. It was called Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And this was the impact of 9/11 on a child with, something like possibly Asperger's, high-functioning kid, very, very intelligent, smart. And his father had called while he was in. He couldn't answer that phone, and there were a number of messages, and his father died in that. And there was a key that he found, and in that key, with that key, his father always played these little games that he had to go around and map out these things on these adventures to find things. And so he thought the key was something left for him, and he found it accidentally. So he was going to map this out. And he would go and visit people, because on the little envelope it had the name Black on there. And so he looked up everybody in the Bronx that had the name Black. And each day he would go out. He figured it would take him 3 years. He calculated how long it would take him to get someplace. And in the end, the show, it basically was, the key was for somebody else. It was for something else that happened in an estate sale. But it led him to meet all these people. And it led, so something was unlocked. He was looking for the lock to unlock it. And it was an incredible story. But I just was thinking about these two films, how it affected me. It actually shook me up pretty much. And I'm thinking about what, my experience in Vietnam, what the war is, what is a war criminal, when do we say no, and the effects upon the average human being, the families, the children, on some horrible act of terrorism, one way or the other, and how do we respond to those things. So I am extremely pleased to have both of you here to talk about these kinds of issues. And I would like to start with Chuck, just to start off here. Chuck is a veteran Navy Chief Petty Officer. This is going to be sort of part two. We want to get into this. Mm-hmm. If you're interested in, seeing part one, if you hadn't seen it, we do have it up on YouTube. You can go to, the HTTPS dot, what is that? Colon / YouTube without the is tu.be/d. I should have put that up. I'm sorry. But if you just email me at djshea@hotmail.com, I'll send you the link. It should be, all you would have to do is look up on Google Veterans for Peace forum with Chuck Wiley, and you'll pick that up. The other is this part. We started off at the beginning of his history, but what I want to do now is to kind of go back and summarize a little bit. You joined the military when?
Originally in 1989, okay. December 1989 when I signed my first papers. Okay. A couple of years with the Army, and then transferring to the Navy in 1992.
So how many years in the military was?
16 years and 9 months altogether.
Okay. So you were basically career military.
That was the intention, yeah.
Yeah. So then this mission that happened was, if I remember was talking about, it was in July in 2006, there was off the coast of Iran, they were sending in, planes to come in? There was an emergency?
Yeah, it was several different mission profiles in the way we were conducting operations in general. None of it really kept with my understanding of the conventions at all, the Geneva Conventions. And the very short version is when I started asking questions about how the missions that we're flying are in keeping with our international law obligations, and how I communicate that to my people that are asking similar sorts of questions. I thought I was going to get an answer that I didn't understand. I had complete faith in the organization that I was a part of. But that changed. I got a fairly hostile response. And I guess you could call it a personality flaw. I don't deal well with a hostile response when I feel like I'm owed an answer over something. I thought at that point, I've been with this outfit more than 16 years. When I ask a direct question, I deserve a direct answer. I'm clearly on the team, so just tell me what's going on. We never got there, and as I was left to do more of my own research and ask more of my own questions, my relationship with my chain of command got more and more hostile until I eventually requested a transfer off the ship. Like, they relieved me of all of my leadership responsibilities, stuck me writing tests for a training department. So I asked for a transfer off the ship. I stipulated that I would prefer to be transferred to any of the half of the fleet that is not involved in Persian Gulf operations at that time. You can send me anywhere, I don't care. I just don't want to come back here. I don't think anything that we were doing in either Iraq or Afghanistan at the time is in keeping with our obligations and isn't the military that I signed up to be a part of.
Right.
To my surprise, by October, I think, I got orders to another ship. Before we even got back to Virginia, I got orders to another ship. But when I got back and transferred off my current ship to the new one, I found out that that ship was returning to the Gulf in 4 months. Vice the almost 2 years it would have been if I'd stayed where I was. So yeah, I took that as kind of a slap in the face. I investigated my options with the Navy Legal Office on base. Right, what can I do? This is what I asked for. This is what I got. This is why I'm objecting to these orders. Because I object to the way we're carrying out these wars. I feel like I can still be part of this organization and finish out the 3 years and change that I have left to retirement. And the answer I got was my options are essentially nil. Board the boat, execute the orders, or go to jail. So at that point, I started investigating my options outside the military. A prime source that I used for a while was GI Rights. They have restrictions on what they can tell people, what they can't over the phone, in order to maintain access, on bases and things like that. So they were kind of helpful, but not really. They told me some people that I could talk to outside of their organization that have been in similar circumstances, and that chain led me to make contact with an organization in Canada called the War Resistor Support Campaign. They turned out to have a number of people from all 4 departments of service already in Canada that were seeing the same things that I was. Up until that point, I was starting to think maybe I'm the crazy one, right?
Right.
There are people on the ship that felt the same way as I did, but you have people that have family obligations and things like that can't really walk away from the medical care, or what have you.
But you had retirement. You had retirement in 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's a decision. That's people where, again, people, some people risk their lives walking away from the military when they're in combat. And there's people that risk, a future. And there was a whole, in the early days, the stigma of desertion, that you didn't get jobs. And again, living with that stigma is another thing when you begin to think about yourself. But the idea of
I mean, it takes. I think I just want people to understand. I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage to say, I'm not going to do this, even if I can just stay 3 more years and stick it out 3 more years to do this. So
it was a slow road. Like I'd love to be able to sit here and tell you as soon as I saw the first mission that we executed that was clearly illegal, that I stood up right then and said, okay, I'm done. I'm walking away.
So it's more of a growing realization?
Yeah, it was a very slow process. I mean, at first, my thought process was, clearly I'm missing something. There's been some sort of legal change or some sort of interpretation. I don't understand the conventions. I don't understand the UN Charter the way I thought I did. And I'd been trained on these topics. They have standard military training on these things. So I'd been trained on these topics. I thought I knew the text pretty well, but clearly we're doing this. We're bombing empty apartment buildings. We're intentionally terrorizing civilian populations to try and chase down ghosts. I don't understand how any of this is legal, but I thought I'm just missing something. And then it became clear, well, it's not me that's missing something, it's an entire chain of command above me that's embarrassed because they're not asking the questions that they should have been asking from the beginning.
What kind of I mean, it sounds like from your side, there was a feeling of betrayal.
Eventually, yeah.
From their side, was it defensive or just purely hostile?
I think
From
they were
your chain
just
of command.
incredulous at first. Like, why do you think it's appropriate to even ask these questions? Who do you think you are? Was the
You're not paid
response that
to
I
think.
got. Yeah, exactly. It was. I got
standard military.
the standard quote, right? You're a service member on a Navy ship. You follow the captain's orders, and that's it, right? If we're doing something illegal, that's not for you to worry about. That's for the captain to worry about.
Which goes back to the judgment at Nuremberg, which
Like,
exactly was the Nuremberg principle, which is that every soldier is obligated to disobey unlawful orders.
Right.
Yeah, you don't just have the right as a soldier.
You have the duty.
You have the duty. You have a responsibility to evaluate the orders that are given to you.
That's right. Except they also have these little clauses in between, but that doesn't mean you're going to get away with it, and you're going to pay the cost and responsibility for making that decision, which means you may go to jail, right?
Yep.
But that's, and they're saying, yes, you must do your duty, but we'll put you in jail if you do. It's a strange thing. But I mean, that is that's part that we want to get to, and I like to have this more as a conversation, so we want people to asking questions of each other here. And I also am curious then, from that point when you decide you made contact, how you got into Canada. How did that happen, and where did you go?
Well, how was I just drove across the border.
Okay.
From
where?
It was Niagara Falls.
Niagara
The
Falls.
first one in. Yeah. I mean, I'd contacted members of the campaign, spoken to them, and at first, I mean, there's a lot of people in the U.S., I guess, that look at Canada. It's sort of like the 51st state, right? It's not really a different country. It's just Canada. They pretend to be a different country, but they're not really a different country, right? And at the time, I had the same impression. I saw Canada as a delaying tactic, right? I don't know where I'm going to end up eventually,
Right.
but this will work for now until I figure things out. So that was my plan, and I'd
Did you
made
have an
contact
attorney
with
up
them.
there?
At the time, I didn't.
Didn't,
I got one soon after I got there, though. So yeah, I'd made contact with them. They told me to come up, and we'll see what happens. We'll show you what we're doing, and if you want to stay, you can stay. If you don't want to stay, that's fine too.
So what state in Canada? I mean,
It was province, Ontario.
Ontario.
Yeah, Toronto, Ontario. Yeah, that's where I ended up. So yeah, I crossed the border. I told them I was going to see friends. Wasn't sure how long I was staying, and they said fine. They told me at the border, if you decide that you want to stay longer than 90 days, you have to check in with immigration and apply for visas and permits and things like that. Like, okay. So I drove across the border, went to Toronto. I was in Toronto about 24 hours. Talking to various members of the organization, talking to some of the other GIs that were in Toronto already, who had gone through the process with Canadian immigration, the refugee division specifically, and decided that that was something that I wanted to do. So a day and a half maybe after I arrived in Canada, I reported to the Immigration and Refugee Division in Toronto and told them that I wanted to apply for asylum in Canada.
So, in that process, I mean, here in the U.S. in the 1980s, I was involved with the sanctuary movement for Central American refugees, and so the various protocols for refugees fleeing persecution and death, all of those things were the things that you applied for. So, when you applied there, what were the conditions of applying for asylum?
Well, Canadian law has changed quite a bit. Specifically, refugee law has changed quite a bit since like the Vietnam days. So the laws that that Canada has now, there's not a specific there's not a specific measure in their immigration law to allow for people like us coming to Canada. It just isn't there. So the refugee application process isn't a perfect fit, but it was a deliberate effort on the part of the Canadian government to close what they felt like was a legal loophole that a lot of people coming up during Vietnam had exploited in Canadian courts. You know, there's a lot of people that have the idea that that during Vietnam, you know, that the mass exodus of sorts that occurred was just a very happy and easy thing that people just walked across, and there was no conflict there. And toward the end, that may have been true, but there's a whole struggle that led up to that is just kind of lost to history now, right? There were a lot of people that were forcibly deported from Canada. You know, at one point, the FBI was allowed to actively hunt people in Canada to bring them back.
I didn't know that.
So there's a ton, like there's a big struggle that happened, you know, that ended up, I guess, revolving, I forget the name of the guy. You know, there was a sort of a center of gravity moment where Canadian authorities forcibly ejected a guy into the hands of the FBI across the Peace Bridge. And that's my understanding, anyways. That was sort of the shift. You know, that was where political motion finally started happening, and the Liberal government of Canada at the time, under Pierre Trudeau as a prime minister, actually started taking action, culminating in the Canadian government having an official order that we are just not going to ask anything about military status. We don't care. So there are no more questions at the border about military status, and if you come to the border from the U.S. and you want to come in, we just verify all of the other requirements, and anything about the military we're not even going to ask about. And that's that. If you meet all the other requirements, you're a landed immigrant. End of story. So today there is no point blank landed immigration status, right? You don't just walk to the Canadian border and become a permanent resident or anything like that. It's a very long, drawn out process for everyone. But there is no specific mechanism in Canadian law to allow people who are fleeing what they consider to be military persecution to come into Canada. There is the General Refugee Protection Act, which Canada uses they used to uphold their responsibilities under the UNHCR, the Charter for Human Rights. So we were considered, I believe it was paragraph 171 applicants, right, which concerns people who are fleeing military service because they feel continued service will constitute a war crime, you know, which was what we fell under. So we were applying under that from the very beginning. The very first guy that went up was in 2004. It was a guy named Jeremy Hinsman.
Oh, yes.
He was Army Airborne. Yeah. So his was the first case that was actually tried. When you apply, I should back up a bit. So when you apply, there's a very extensive case history that you fill out with one of their immigration officers. You're allowed to have counsel if you want it. And then once they have a chance to review that, they sit down for an interview process which is sort of a court tribunal boardroom type thing, where they actually have a case officer that sits down and has gone through all the information you've submitted, will ask clarifying questions and that sort of thing. 99% of the time, it's just a one-on-one process. It's you and whoever's going to be adjudicating your case. The government has the right to send a representative to clarify on factual points to that case, if they have a feeling one way or the other. But until this point, my understanding is they'd almost never exercised that right. When Jeremy Hinsman showed up and his case started to gain media traction in Toronto and eventually across Canada, the Liberal government under Paul Martin at the time sent, for the first time in a long time, a Crown lawyer to the proceedings when it was time for his case to be heard in front of the Immigration and Refugee Board. So the Crown lawyer argued basically exactly the opposite of everything that is in the Nuremberg Principles. The Crown lawyer argued that an individual soldier doesn't have the
right to
he doesn't have the right to refuse orders. He doesn't have the right to judge the illegality of the war or the orders that he's given because he doesn't have the perspective to judge those. So his judgment is basically null and void. So any argument that Jeremy Hinsman might bring about the overall illegality of the war should also be null and void because, like many people paying attention to the media, he doesn't have the proper frame of reference to make an adequate judgment about that. So the short version is the IRB bought it and denied Jeremy's case based on those grounds.
Right.
And after that, everyone who came behind him essentially got the exact same denial.
And he was going through appeals for a number of years, and then
Yeah.
under threat of deportation, and eventually deported, right?
He's actually still up there.
Is he still there? Okay.
Yeah, he's gotten close a few times.
Yeah.
But he's managed to hang in there.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I thought he had to come back. The in that process, the Harper government comes in. You've been there how many years in Canada?
I got there in February 2007 and left in February of 2015. Yeah.
So you've been there a long time. You had to see you're working there, and there's a whole community of veterans that you're around. The average person that you meet on the street, though, what was their opinion? Because I mean, like here in the U.S. or anywhere, you have government with their sort of logic for being in war and for recruiting young men and women to join the military, and their need to punish those that don't go along with the program, so they create fear in the people that even think about, maybe I got in this for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
But that's the government thought. And oftentimes civilians were more, at least that I have met, were more, would be statistically against the war in a sense, especially after a few years went by after 9/11 and stuff.
Oh, very, very much so. There was, to my experience, there was a huge disconnect the entire time I was in Canada between what the government's desire was and what the people's desire was. I mean, the objective statistics, or as close as we get to objective statistics, are multiple polls that were done by a company called Stratcom in Canada, which is one of their major political polling organizations. And I think the lowest Stratcom poll showed 64% support for some sort of measure that allowed us to stay. Canadians always, a majority of Canadians wanted to see some sort of resolution on the part of their government to allow us to stay. And I guess one of the most interesting factors of those polls is even when you break them down by voter demographic and age demographic and things like that, even across political parties, we even had majority support among conservative voters. It was slim majority support. It was in the high 50s, but it was still majority support. I mean, every voting party, every major party that Canada has had majority support among its base for us. But shortly after Jeremy got there, Paul Martin's government was supplanted by Stephen Harper's Conservative Party as the leading party. And Paul Martin's government was sort of a hands-off type of thing. They objected purely on the grounds of political expediency and friendship with the U.S. They saw it as a political problem with the U.S. if they were going to allow us to stay. Mm-hmm. That's fairly obvious. But there was really no outward pursuit, right? They seemed to feel like all they needed to do was put that one iron in the fire of this is why we object to this, and just let the process work. Mm-hmm. The game changed considerably when Stephen Harper took over the government, and from that point it was active pursuit and finding a way to get us out of Canada because we were a major political problem. I mean, they brought a lot of things to bear about how we were clogging up the system and things like that. And we were at one point, one of his sitting immigration ministers referred to us with active cases still in his system as bogus refugee claimants in front of a news camera. So there was a lot of intentional biasing of the case officers to get them to come up with the right decisions. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that was the government's viewpoint. There's a Stratcom polls. My personal view, or my personal interactions with Canadians, I very rarely met anyone who wasn't strongly supportive. One of the things that will always stick with me, I gave a lot of university talks and things like that. And at one point I traveled to Kingston, Ontario, to Queen's University to talk to several of their sociology classes throughout the day. And one of the talks I gave, very near Queen's University, is the Royal College in Canada, which is their equivalent of West Point. So one of the talks I gave throughout the day, several cadets and instructors from the Royal College in uniform, like, file into the back of the room to, I guess, see what the talk's about. So that made some of the people that were, trying to organize the event a little bit nervous, and they came and asked me, like, we can ask them to leave if you want. It's like, it doesn't matter. As long as, like, I can be respectful, as long as they're respectful, they don't have to agree with me. We can talk about this. Mm-hmm. Right? There's no reason to kick them out. So, I gave the talk. They asked a few questions. Nothing near as difficult as I thought they were going to ask. I was prepared for some tough questions from them, but there really weren't any. But the thing that sticks with me is at the end of the talk, as everyone's filing out of the room, most of the cadets are leaving. One of the officers from the Royal College comes up to me, and there's a few people there milling around that I'm having discussions with, and as everything breaks off, he comes up toward the end. We shake hands. He introduces himself, and he says to me before he leaves, he says, "You guys have to win this. Like, you realize that, right? Like, you guys have to win this. You have to find a way to beat the government in this." Is that, he said it's bad that you guys started this the way you did. It maybe should have been better organized before it got off the ground. But now that it's off the ground, now that it's going, you have to win because the government's wrong. And if they tell you, as American soldiers trying to come to Canada, that you don't have the right to decide when orders are right or wrong, and they win this, and they kick you out over it, then the next war, they're going to say that to us.
That's right.
This is what I was wondering when you were telling the story of the initial ruling and the sort of contravention of the Nuremberg principles. What was the reaction in the refugee-seeking veteran community? Because that's both outrageous and it's like one of those what the hell.
Yeah, it was kind of that sort of moment. Half the people are like, yeah, we should have expected this. Mm-hmm. We know they're going to play dirty pool. Yeah. Right? They're beginning with a known result in mind.
Sure.
Right. So they know where they want to go. They're going to say what they need to say in order to get there. And the game for the Conservative Party in Canada was to always stay right on the edge of too ridiculous for people to speak up.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's just the way they've conducted themselves. The Conservative Party was in power the entire time I was in Canada under various governments, shifting from minority governments to an eventual majority government. But they held power the entire time I was there. So it was a string of conservative immigration ministers, and they would get burned out. They would. The first one was Dianne Findlay. She was the conservative immigration minister when I was there, and as the campaign and as public opinion zeroed in on her and turned the heat up too high, the portfolio was shifted to a different minister out west. And the whole game started again. And as public opinion zeroed in on him, and the heat turned up too high, the campaign, the immigration portfolio shifted to a new minister. So it's like this shell game, right? They know that public opinion, or the public at large, is generally more distracted by personal stories than by the actual merits of what's being discussed. So they wait long enough to allow it to be zeroed in on this specific minister that's causing all these problems, and then they change the game.
So I'm curious too. What was the lawyer's argument to what the government was putting forward on that? I mean, usually I think of analogies or various other ways of looking at it. I mean, if you'd say, well, is it right? I mean, your officer tells you to go over and put a gun up to a kid's head and shoot him, and you're going to go ahead and do it. I mean, did anybody raise those kinds of questions? I mean,
it was. I mean, so very early on the campaign, there was an attorney in Toronto named Jeffrey House, who himself is a U.S. military veteran who fled to Canada during the Vietnam occupation, and got permanent residency in Vietnam, got a law degree there, started practicing law. In Canada. Sorry, yeah. He got a law degree, started practicing there, and when all of this started to come to public light about the 2003 Iraq invasion, and Jeremy showed up and a few people showed up after him, Jeffrey House agreed to take these cases on a pro bono basis, right? Because it looked like a slam dunk. Anyone with any logical analysis capability, there's a no-brainer case here, right? It's a very open and shut type of deal. So what he signed on for was, I'm going to volunteer my time to take your cases to the IRB, explain your cases to the IRB, and they're going to agree that yes, this needs to happen, and you guys are going to stay in Canada. So when the government interference started and the public campaigns against us started from the government, he found himself in a much more involved and robust fight than he had signed on for, and trying to stay involved on a pro bono basis especially. I mean, he's a criminal lawyer with offices downtown. Like, it's going to eat a significant part of his practice. So once the fight started for real, he had to back out. We ended up with a new attorney. After we worked with various legal aid services for a while, we ended up with a new attorney who has been amazing for the entire process, a lady named Alyssa Manning. We first met her as she was starting her own legal practice. So I guess we've kind of grown up together. But she's been really good. She, I think, was the first one that really started bringing very difficult arguments for the government to counter, and really digging into these cases and digging into just how uncomprehensive Canadian law is on a lot of these points. The Immigration and Refugee Protection Act in Canada depends a lot on interpretation of international law, and they don't have their own text for a lot of sorts of things. And the things that are written down, it turns out, are wildly open to interpretation. And there's a lot of arguing back and forth that goes on. But she's been dealing with the cases ever since, and she's raised a lot of various arguments to counter different. I don't know how to put this without sounding offensive. I mean, some of the arguments that the government brings to the courts are just silly on their face. They just have no merit whatsoever. They tried the entire approach of soldiers don't have the ability to judge the orders that they're given for a while, until a federal court said that's ridiculous. And then it was, well, there's really no proof that if we send them back, that you're trying to dodge the issue of the legality or the morality of the war altogether. They said, well, there's really no proof if we send them back that the U.S. military is actually going to prosecute them. Except there was. There was a ton of proof. at that point in time, I think the number was somewhere in the neighborhood of 94% of people who just desert the military. They just leave. About 94% end up administratively discharged. Nothing happens. For a lot of us that were coming back to the States at the time, there were huge jail sentences being handed down. There were people that, for being in Canada for 6 months and having the audacity to speak to a few newspapers and a few university crowds, were coming back to court martials that weren't laden with evidence about how long they'd been gone, but were laden with evidence about who they'd been speaking to while they were gone. And they were getting sentences that were, one man in particular was sent back to the Army at Fort Campbell, ended up with a 15-month sentence for being in Canada for about a year and speaking to 2 television news outlets, a handful of newspapers, and several university crowds. And he walked into Leavenworth to start his 15-month sentence and got bunked with a guy that got 7 months for manslaughter, for 3 counts of manslaughter in Iraq. So, okay, clearly our priorities are a little bit off, but
How many veterans is there? Sort of an estimated figure that went up to Canada?
So the number that was above board, and by that I mean people who were actually going through the Immigration and
Process,
Refugee
yeah.
Board, I think peaked out at around 50.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's not a huge
No.
number. So
No, there was
Yeah.
no support for this idea that we were clogging up
Yeah.
some kind of system, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So so you're there in, did you say 2006?
2007.
2007? Until 2015. Okay. Going through this process,
Mhm.
what is the emotional toll of that on a daily basis, not knowing your refugee status?
Well, it's at first, obviously, it's very stressful, but I mean, humans are adaptable creatures, right? So after a while, it fades into the background until each step in the process comes up again. The first few months, it was a lot of white knuckle anticipation as things are moving quickly, and then I got my initial negative decision from the Immigration and Refugee Board and filed an appeal to the federal court that I wanted the decision looked at again. And once that happens, my case sort of stops until we actually get in front of the federal court. And because of the case backlog, that might be a year and a half. So after a month or two, you just kind of forget about it. It's once you're there for 4 months, going through the process, you become eligible for a work permit. So I can file paperwork and tell them I want to support myself. I'm going to be here for a while. I just want to get a job. So I got a work permit, I got a social insurance number, and I went to work. I found a job. I was lucky enough to find a job with an employer that was very supportive, and I was able to stay at the same job pretty much the entire time I was there.
Oh, excellent.
After I got my work permit, the very first job that I took, I kept until I had to leave. So I was pretty stable and had a normal life for the most part. It was just every 6 to 8 months that would get interrupted with a few weeks of stark terror because it's time for the process to move forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you so you go through all this process, you have other people who are going through the same process. I should let people know that there were also people that stayed in the U.S. and they were prosecuted and spent 15 months. I think Camila Mejia was 11 months. Kevin Benderman was 13 months, something like that. I can't. And there were a lot of people that were in Canada and came back, and the government didn't want to make too big a deal out of it by the time they came down. So they did get a hearing and were released, sometimes with a dishonorable, sometimes under honorable conditions, but with conditions. And it was frightening. I knew people that actually told the military they were not going to respond, and they had to go through underground for a while, and they were also talking to people up in Canada. But the main thing is that nobody knew how they were going to be treated. Some people got off scot-free, other people got prosecuted, and you didn't know where you stood on that whole thing. So that's that has to be an emotional thing that make a decision either to come back or not come back. And in that process I should say that Courage to Resist is a good place for people to look at some of the veterans that are still up in Canada, GI resistors. So couragetoresist.org, which we have up on the screen here, is a good place to look it up. You'll see Jeremy Hinsman in there and other veterans. Is something to know about. There's also there's a war resistor in Canada. He's in a church right now.
Rodney Watson.
Rodney Watson, yeah. And he's been in that church now a number of years.
Yeah.
You remember how long?
I want to say it was around, I could have this wrong, I want to say it was around 2010 that he went in.
Yeah.
He went into sanctuary.
So he's staying in a church there, under similar to what we did in the U.S. for a number of the Central American refugees, where churches was actually house people and defy the government's deportation orders.
Yep.
And well, we filed for asylum during that point in time. It's a good history for people to know and learn, but you can check into that. So then your path is to come back. I mean, I should include Steve. We're going to be running out of time here, but let's move to Steve a little bit here too. Is that your project is actually interviewing veterans and sort of a veterans project, which almost like what you were doing right here.
It's what we're doing right here.
Yeah.
This is my project,
Yeah.
and I mean, I guess one of the questions that I would ask in terms of managing who you are now. I mean, is this something that you're the last 10 years that you've been living this, 10 years plus that you've been living this, or 10 years anyway, how has this affected you? I mean, how much time do you spend thinking about yourself as someone who has resisted this particular war?
Well, there was definitely an analytical period that I went through, but I think the end result of a lot of reflection, on what good I can continue to do here, is that I think that there's a disconnect where a lot of veterans, especially young veterans or people considering military service, sort of get lost. They have very powerful organizations and a lot of people saying one thing while they're seeing another, and it can be hard to translate that. So the thing that I want to focus on from here out is, I guess, just making sure that people don't get away with lying to troops.
That's a great point. The value of truth. I mean, I guess this was some work that I've done in the past was on the sort of the way attitudes and legal mechanisms related to conscientious objection of various kinds transformed in Germany as a result of the Second World War, the Nuremberg trials, and the aftermath. And one of the things that I don't see in the context of the American Armed Forces is kind of an institutionalization of a right to refuse.
Right.
And it seems like you're in the third case. There's sort of three cases of conscientious objection. One is total pacifism. In that case, at least with religious justification, is possible in the United States, although difficult. Second case is selective objection. You object to the legality or morality of a particular war. The third case seems like it was yours, which you were objecting to, correct me if I'm wrong, was the legality of the tactics and being actually used in your theater of operations that you were being asked to contribute to on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, it was there was the original I guess the original problem that the war itself was not legal, but that was really the second thing that I became cognizant of.
Right.
Yeah.
That wasn't your immediate experience.
Right.
That was
No. Yeah. I'd say you're right.
Okay. So I mean, this is, from my point of view, given that we have a quote-unquote all-volunteer service, yes, it's all volunteer, but what is the obstacle to creating some kind of mechanism for opting out of this system, given unless we want to just say that 18-year-olds always make really excellent decisions, especially when they're lied to.
Yeah. I mean, there's even, if you look at the inception of the 2003 invasion, one of the things that Congress realized very early on is that we're not going to be able to maintain this for very long with the numbers that we have in the military. So we need some way to stop the numbers in the military from dropping. So you had the whole stop loss thing, which the moment they made, the moment they made stop loss retroactive to people that are in right now, contracts that have already been signed, to me, morally, that's lying to the people that you contract.
Let's explain stop loss for people who might not understand that.
So the stop loss program was signed by Congress in 2003, and basically what it did was it gave the military, all four branches of the military, the power to identify specific military occupational specialties that were critical to the continued prosecution of the war. And if you were in one of those specialties and your departure from the military on your agreed upon contracted end of obligated service date, if your departure would have caused undue stress to the war effort, they had the option just to indefinitely extend your contract. Now, of course, they had to continue to pay you, right? Everything had to be done. It was just as if your contract didn't end, right? They could just take the signed contract with the end date that it had on it and essentially just flush it down the toilet.
Well, too, wasn't that the idea that you are in active reserves for a number of years after you leave the military, and they were just calling you back to duty?
In some cases, yeah, but stop loss in a few cases, especially with senior enlisted personnel, was actually executed on people who had been active duty for longer than 8 years already.
Ah, okay.
Right? There were several instances where that happened. So there was some initial logic of we're just reactivating you under individual ready reserve, but that didn't last long.
Which was contractually legal, but unprecedented. No one anticipated it.
Right.
Yeah.
That plus the individual augmentee program that eventually cropped its head up, which was just insanely dangerous in my opinion. It set the stage for a lot of bad stuff to happen.
Well, Steve, we should talk a little bit about you were in the Army. You're an Army veteran, and you were also in nuclear missile operations in the first of the 41st Field Artillery in, I can't pronounce it,
Schwäbisch Gmünd,
Germany.
Yes.
and that was 1982 to 1985. And now you're currently teaching anthropology in Abu Dhabi. And you put forward this project. And what are you calling this project? It's
Veterans Resistance Project.
Veterans Resistance. And with the Veterans Resistance, you're looking into the idea of activism within it?
Yeah, I'm actually, the core of the project is looking at the ambivalences that veterans encounter as they enter into activism or anti-war activism or peace activism. Particularly those who make relatively rapid transitions into activism, but even those who come to it 20 years later. How do you continue to identify as a veteran, and put that together with being someone who is against war without giving, and this is sort of key to the point, the message that you're not anti-soldier, you're not anti-military member, you're not anti-veteran. And how do people manage that? Part of what goes into this is having interviewed a lot of veterans now, not necessarily all activists, but recognizing that for many of them, for many of us, service impacted us in ways that we did not necessarily recognize at the time. Now, if you become a conscientious objector, it's pretty clear. But many people get out and years on have had come to experience that they have PTSD years on, or even if they don't, come to recognize the ways in which they have become what I call militarized, how this attitude towards being oriented to mission, towards accomplishing the goal, towards getting to the end. These can all be good things, but we inculcate, we bring into ourselves an ethos of sacrifice. This idea that says, I don't matter very much, what matters is other people. This is actually very, very good in the close-knit confines of a combat unit. Right. Or when you're in a team situation, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it makes us really vulnerable to exploiting ourselves. Right. I mean, I just remember back when I first became an activist, I became an early, shortly after getting out of the military, 1988, 1989, 1990, I got into anti-imperialist, anti-apartheid, Central America solidarity stuff, and I found it really comfortable to work 16, 17 hours a day. It wasn't until I met my wife and we were looking for an apartment, and I found this one that was like, $450 a month, no light, no air, and I'm like, wow, this place is really cheap. We can live here, no problem. And she's like, only a veteran would think that. Only an activist would think that. And I'm like, huh. The idea that it's okay to exploit yourself. And so what I'm looking at is how do you build into your consciousness the capacity to continue to act for the long term without getting burnt out by saying, I'm not important.
Got it. We got about 1 minute here. Well, I want, again, this is conversations that never end. I mean, we need to continue talking. I want to say that Steve is also going to be at the Veteran for Peace convention doing a workshop. And what's the other gentleman that's going to be with you?
Sam Cole.
Sam Cole. And they're going to be there, and that's going to be in San Diego, August 6th through the 9th. For anybody that wants to look that up. Again, I want to thank Chuck for coming back and telling us more about his experiences. I learned a lot, and I hope everybody else there did. I want to thank our producers, Kelly Labonte and Jim Lockhart, for making this program possible and for all the work they do in the community. And I think, again, it's a pleasure to have both of you here, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the convention. I'll be down there too.